Raleigh Miminiger loved his mother-in-law, but the time he spent in a hot attic on a sunny spring day made him rethink some of his recent life decisions. For example, this one. When he agreed to help his mother-in-law with spring cleaning, he didn't expect it to be 30 degrees in Atlanta, Georgia on April 4th. He lugged boxes up to the attic above the second floor, believing it must be around 38 degrees in the storage room. He had just carried a box of Christmas decorations up to the attic and returned to the first floor, breathing heavily, even though he was in pretty good shape for a 45-year-old man. "You have a lot of boxes up there, Mom," he remarked. "Is there anything we can throw away?" Helen Sutterway thought for a few seconds before answering. "Actually, there are a few boxes of your wife's things that you could take home. They have her name on them. They've been up there for a long time. Probably half a dozen or more. They might take up space in your attic." "I can do that," Raleigh replied. "Next time I go upstairs, I'll find them and start bringing them down." "Thank you, dear," she said, not hiding her love for her son-in-law. Raleigh and Helen's daughter, Liz, had been married for 22 years and had dated for 2 years before that. Helen and her late husband, Luke, had grown very fond of Raleigh, and the feeling was mutual, which is why Raleigh was helping his mother-in-law that day. When Raleigh struggled up to the attic with another box of Christmas decorations, he looked back at the piles of boxes and noticed several with his wife's name on them. 4 of them had Liz's name on them, so Raleigh set them aside to take downstairs later. He had 2 more boxes to carry up. Raleigh looked at the 4 boxes standing to the side after he had carried the last boxes upstairs. He decided to look inside to see if they were worth taking home. The first box Raleigh looked in contained several Barbie dolls and accessories. He knew they were probably worth something, so he would definitely take that box home. The second box contained several dozen old photos of his wife at different ages, a few old report cards, and an ultrasound scan. What the hell? The ultrasound scan was taken 24 years ago. Raleigh felt nauseous. When he calmed down, Raleigh looked at the ultrasound scan like a doctor, studying every detail of the document. The ultrasound scan showed that it did indeed belong to Liz Sutterway and indicated that the fetus shown in the image was several weeks old. Raleigh's mouth suddenly went dry and his hands began to shake. The date on the image matched the summer before Raleigh and Liz's senior year at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. They had dated for most of their junior year and had been a couple since the spring. They had even discussed marriage before leaving for the summer, Raleigh to Des Moines, Iowa, and Liz to Atlanta. Raleigh and Liz talked every week during summer break. He didn't look at another girl the entire summer and believed that Liz wasn't seeing anyone else either. She never gave him any reason to think she wasn't a loyal girlfriend, but apparently she had been lying to him the whole time. Raleigh sat down on the attic floor and fought hard not to throw up his lunch again. The more Raleigh thought about it, the worse he felt. He was sure she wasn't pregnant when she came back to school in August, even though she had refused to have sex for several weeks, claiming she had a yeast infection. Pregnancy and a secret abortion were not proof of chastity, let alone exclusivity. Damn, damn, damn. They had married a year after graduating high school, and 5 minutes ago, Raleigh would have said their marriage was perfect. They had a son, Greg, 20, and a daughter, Ginny, 18. Both had good jobs and lived in a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. Raleigh got up off the floor, put the ultrasound in his pocket, and closed the box he had been looking at. He checked the 2 unopened boxes and found nothing of importance. Then he carried all 4 boxes downstairs and loaded them into the trunk of his car. He wanted to drive home immediately, but he knew his mother-in-law had asked him to run some errands. As he did them, he wondered if his mother-in-law and late father-in-law had known about their daughter's despicable deception. The thought made his stomach churn. Helen looked suspiciously at Raleigh when he shivered as he hugged her goodbye an hour later. "You look terrible, Raleigh. Maybe you should rest before you go home," Helen said. "It's only an hour, Mom. I'm fine. Just a little headache," Raleigh replied. Maybe it was too hot in the attic. By the time Raleigh got home, his mild headache had turned into a severe one, and his stomach had joined in. He had so many questions, but he knew that the answers would most likely lead to a heated argument. Was he willing to risk destroying his marriage and his life? Liz was almost done cooking dinner when Raleigh walked in the door. She had expected him to be hungry after a day of work at his mother's house, so she was disappointed when he said he felt nauseous and didn't want to eat. He took a packet of Alka-Seltzer out of the cabinet and dropped the tablets into a glass of water. "Maybe you should lie down," she said to her husband. He agreed and went to the bedroom to lie down. However, he couldn't sleep because his head was filled with questions he couldn't answer, such as how many times his wife had cheated on him during their relationship and whether his son and daughter were his biological children. Raleigh got up from the couch, feeling no more rested than when he had gone to bed. He spent the rest of the night sitting quietly in his chair. Liz knew something was wrong with her husband, but he wasn't talking. Literally. Raleigh tossed and turned all night after the couple went to bed. By the time he got out of bed on Sunday morning, he realized that, unlike his wife, he couldn't pretend that everything was fine in their marriage. He wasn't going to live a lie. He waited until he and his wife were sitting at the table, then dropped the bomb on them. Liz had just put a forkful of lasagna in her mouth when Raleigh slipped a copy of the ultrasound under her plate. Raleigh quickly realized he should have waited until she swallowed the bite because he felt very uncomfortable when she spit it back onto her plate with a loud gurgle. He almost threw up. She, on the other hand, reacted in her own way. Her face turned blue. Her eyes grew as big as saucers, as they say. "Damn," she whispered. In 25 years of their relationship, he had never heard her say that word. "Where did you get that?" Needless to say, dinner was ruined. Her eyes were still wide open and her face was almost blue as she slowly reached for the ultrasound photo and traced it with her fingertips, as if it were Braille and she were blind and reading it. She stared at the paper and Raleigh stared at her, and it was probably the longest 15 seconds of both their lives. "You have to give me back the original. It's mine, and I want it back," she said sharply. "In time, dear," he replied softly. "Don't you want to fill in the blanks for me?" "Not really," she said, glaring at him. "But I suppose you won't take no for an answer right now, am I right?" Raleigh shook his head, looking at the woman who, just yesterday, had been the center of his world. He watched the emotions flash across her face as she decided how much of the truth to tell him, knowing that too much would end their marriage, as surely as if he had caught her in a lie. She quickly thought about how much he already knew. "That summer I saw my ex-boyfriend from school a few times. You know, the one I told you about, the one who took my virginity. I got pregnant. I had an abortion. I told you I had a yeast infection when we went back to school so I would have a little more time to recover. I made a mistake. You didn't need to know about it. Haven't I been a good wife and mother all these years?" Raleigh expected tears. Instead, he saw an almost smug smile. To say he was surprised would be an understatement. Raleigh was also surprised by the brevity of her explanation, and the fact that she didn't apologize. "Despite the fact that we were in a relationship and talking about marriage, you slept with your ex-boyfriend several times, got pregnant, had an abortion, and hid it from me all these years. And you call that a mistake and say I shouldn't have known. You believed that?" he asked, his voice betraying his disbelief. Liz lowered her eyes for a moment. Even to her, when Raleigh explained it, her actions seemed disgusting and heartless. "We weren't married then, so I wasn't cheating on you. And since we've been married, I've never looked at another man that way," she cried in her defense. "That was almost 25 years ago before we were married. Were we or weren't we in a relationship at that point? We were in a relationship. We were even talking about getting married. You cheated on me, whatever you want to call it," Raleigh growled. "And the fact that you got pregnant and had an abortion without telling me is the height of deception, bitch. You didn't think I had a right to know about it?" When we were together, we didn't talk much about our past. The past is the past. Neither of us was a virgin. What difference does it make if I had another man? She asked. Only this one wasn't before us, Raleigh growled. We were together, a couple, supposedly serious. But one of us clearly wasn't that serious. And we didn't even touch on the subject of pregnancy and abortion. You wanted him. You got him. And his child. Liz suddenly stood up from her chair at the table, grabbed her plate, and threw everything on it into the trash. She looked at Raleigh and saw a light bulb go off above his head, figuratively speaking. At least answer that, Liz. Did your parents know about you and him? Did they know you had their grandson aborted? She looked at her husband with an expression he took for confusion. He knew she didn't want to answer, but he kept looking at her, silently demanding an answer. She cleared her throat and pressed her lips together. My mom knew about us, but she didn't approve of my decision to have an abortion. Yes, she knew we were a couple when I was dating him. She never said a word, though she warned me that I would probably lose you if you ever found out. How did you find out? Liz asked. Did you rummage through my mother's attic for fun? I was in the attic cleaning up Christmas decorations. Your mom said there were some boxes of your stuff there that I should take home. Out of curiosity, I opened every box to see what was in them. That ultrasound photo was in the second box, along with a bunch of old photos. By the way, those boxes are in my trunk right now. Where should I put them? Liz wasn't naive enough to believe that her husband would let this discovery go unpunished. She knew it would hurt. She definitely didn't want to be caught off guard. So, what are you thinking, Roland? She asked quietly. I don't know, Liz. I think I'm still in shock. Finding out that the woman I love madly has cheated on me. And everything else, he said quietly, his voice choked with emotion. I don't consider it cheating, Raleigh. We weren't together, she remarked. You don't consider it cheating, because you did cheat, he said. But on the other hand, it definitely is cheating. We were together long enough to talk about marriage. We were faithful to each other. At least that's what we said. I would say you betrayed me, but in reality, you slept with him. The couple spent the rest of the night in silence. Liz kept glancing at her husband, trying to read the emotions on his face. In his eyes, she saw a mixture of anger and sadness. It bothered her that he hadn't expressed his anger toward her. Neither spouse slept that night. Liz briefly considered distracting her husband with sex, but dismissed the idea, realizing that sex was the root of Raleigh's problem. Regardless of what she had told her husband, at the moment she slept with her ex-boyfriend. She was fully aware that she was cheating on Raleigh because they were supposed to be a couple who didn't cheat on each other. Raleigh and Liz weren't supposed to be just a couple. They had already paid for an off-campus apartment for their final years at Tulane and discussed what would happen after that. Raleigh Memoniger seemed to be everything Elizabeth Suttertway wanted in a partner. He was handsome, athletic, intelligent, and seemed to love her more and more every day. As a chemistry major with good grades, he seemed destined for a successful career. So why did she sleep with her ex-boyfriend, Scott Wilkins, several times during the summer after her junior year at Tulane? Wilkins was a typical high school heartthrob at Martin Luther King High School. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall, weighed 200 pounds, had long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. He was the star quarterback of the football team and also a starter on the basketball and baseball teams. Of course, he dated the school's head cheerleader and prom queen, Elizabeth Suttertway, a blonde with blue eyes and a curvy figure. They were a couple from their sophomore year of high school until the middle of their sophomore year of college. Most people believed they would get married soon. They were both virgins until they met. That was until Scott broke up with Liz during the Christmas break of their sophomore year. Liz went to Tulane, and Scott went to Auburn, where he apparently met his soulmate, who turned out to be the daughter of the founder of a successful accounting firm in Mobile, Alabama. Needless to say, Liz was devastated. She didn't date anyone seriously until her junior year at Tulane, when she met the brown-haired, blue-eyed Raleigh Merminer at a party. He was a little shorter than Scott, 6 feet 1 inch, and handsome, but not as attractive. She found that unlike Scott, Raleigh was modest and intelligent. At the party, she gave Raleigh her cell phone number, and 3 days later he called to ask her out on a date. A month later, they were dating and having sex regularly. Seeing her daughter sluggishly spending her summer after her breakup with Scott, Helen Sutterway was thrilled when her daughter told her she had found a new boyfriend. When they were still together 3 months later, Helen suggested that her daughter bring her boyfriend home for spring break. She enjoyed seeing her daughter happy again and found the young man friendly and almost overly polite. Helen's husband, Jack, also liked Raleigh, and he didn't mind that Jack beat Raleigh at golf. Liz knew that Raleigh was a pretty good golfer, so when she heard that Raleigh had lost the bet, she decided that her boyfriend was being cautious to get her father to like him. Raleigh smiled but didn't answer when Liz asked him about it. Helen knew very well that Raleigh and Liz were planning to live together in their old age, so she was more than surprised when she saw that Liz was getting ready for a date 2 weeks after returning home for summer vacation. What are you wearing, Elizabeth?" Helen asked her daughter when she entered the kitchen on Friday evening. I have a date with Scott. We're just going out as friends," Liz said, pretending she didn't care. "I ran into him at the store the other day, and we decided to talk." Helen stared at her daughter, raising her eyebrows. Liz fidgeted. They both remembered the tears Liz had shed when Scott broke up with her. "We're just friends, Mom. Don't make a big deal out of it," Liz pleaded. "Sure, like I believe you. Aren't you dating Raleigh?" Helen asked sharply. "Well, yes," Liz replied weakly. "And?" Helen asked. "Does it mean anything?" Liz knew Helen was right, but she didn't ask her mother's opinion. "We just talk, Mom," she pleaded. "Is that what you kids call it now? In my day, we called it—" "I don't want to hear it, Mom," Liz interrupted sharply. Much to Helen's dismay, her daughter went out with Scott several more times over the next few weeks. Helen always stayed home when Liz came back, every time after midnight. Helen wasn't born yesterday. A few weeks later, Helen held her crying daughter tightly in her arms on the bed, and Liz's ultrasound was lying on the table. Liz came home from her date early, for the first time since she had started seeing Scott, and Helen knew it wasn't going to be a good night for her daughter. Helen's husband, Jack, was oblivious as usual, watching baseball on TV, and Helen slipped out of the living room and went to her daughter. "What did he say?" Helen asked about Scott's reaction when he found out Liz had been pregnant for several weeks. Helen knew the news wasn't good from the way her daughter was sobbing and shaking in her arms. He said he would help pay for the abortion before going back to college to his girlfriend. "I can't believe he even thought about marrying me and leaving the baby," Liz sobbed. Helen thought about it, but she was too caring a mother to say, "I told you so." She stroked her daughter's back and asked quietly, "So you're going back to Raleigh?" "What will you tell him?" "Of course I'll go back to Raleigh," Liz said, wiping her eyes and seeming to gather her strength. "And he doesn't need to know anything except that I had a bad yeast infection, and I won't be able to have sex for a while. He's a good guy, and as long as I satisfy him from time to time, in other ways, he'll be fine." Liz blushed as she said this. She knew her mother was smart enough to understand that she was having sex, but she had never talked about it out loud. She was almost certain that her father probably still believed she was a virgin. "You won't tell him about Scott, will you? You didn't tell him about him when you called this summer, did you?" Helen asked. "God, no. I didn't tell him anything about Scott," Liz replied with conviction. "We talked before I left, and I know he believed I would refrain from sex. But he was wrong. It's my body, and I can give it to whomever I want, whenever I want. We're not married yet. As for the other thing, I'll take that to my grave, thank you. Only you, Scott, and I will ever know about it." "Never? Even if you marry him?" Helen asked. "As the old saying goes, what you don't know won't hurt you," Liz replied. Helen left the room, and Liz got ready for bed. She picked up the ultrasound photo from the table and was about to throw it into the small trash can next to the table. But then she changed her mind and slipped it into the middle drawer of the table. Raleigh spent most of Sunday watching the big TV on the wall in the living room. Liz could see that he wasn't watching what was on. She knew he was lost in thought about what would happen to his marriage. She hoped he would behave as usual, rationally, which she believed would be best for their marriage and for her personally. Raleigh's first reaction when he found the ultrasound photo was to divorce that cheating woman. However, after a day of reflection, several other thoughts came to mind, including the very obvious fact that he and Liz had been married for 23 years, and he considered their marriage to be a good one. Could he completely ignore that fact? Besides, she was a wonderful mother to his two wonderful children. Although they were both in college and hardly ever home, he knew that a divorce would still hurt them. Nevertheless, he kept coming back to the fact that Liz had cheated on him, gotten pregnant by another man, and then had an abortion, hiding it from him for almost 25 years. Deep down, he knew that if he hadn't been cheated on and lied to, he would never have stayed with Liz, let alone married her. But he also knew deep down that throughout their marriage, she had been a wonderful, loving wife. He objectively doubted that he could have found a better companion if he had left Liz before the wedding. Although he absolutely hated what Liz had done, he tried to understand which was worse, her betrayal or his wounded pride. After all, not everyone knew that Liz had cheated on him, so the humiliation factor was negligible. Looking at Raleigh, staring blankly at the TV, Liz couldn't understand her husband's dilemma. Even if they didn't agree that her affair with another man was cheating, it had happened almost 25 years ago, and she had been completely faithful to him ever since. A questionable infidelity 25 years ago, and a nearly perfect wife since then. How could it be anything other than obvious, he believed? "I'm sorry, did you say something?" "I didn't hear you," Raleigh said when he thought his wife had said something. She exhaled in irritation. "It was almost 25 years ago, even if you want to call it cheating. 25 years, and I believe I've been a damn good wife for almost 25 years, she repeated, raising her voice. "Tell me that's not true." "I wish I could say it wasn't," he replied. "Then I wouldn't even think about it. But you cheated on me, lied to me, and deceived me. That's not what you do to someone you love." It was a mistake. 25 years ago, for God's sake," she exclaimed loudly. "That's what you said," he replied quietly. "You think I'll just take your word for it, like I believed everything until I found that damn ultrasound photo? How can I believe you haven't done this since we got married? I can't anymore." Nothing changed in the Merminer household over the next few days. The couple barely spoke to each other, and when they did, they argued about an event that had happened almost 25 years ago. God, you get so fixated on one thing when you think about something. It was 25 years ago. 25 damn years ago. Get over it, Liz shouted when the subject came up again on Thursday evening. Now it was Raleigh's turn to be stunned by his wife's bad word. In all their years together, he had only heard her say it twice. Raleigh knew it wouldn't go away. The next move had to be his. In the meantime, he decided he needed to at least remember the good times before he found that damn echogram. Nothing Raleigh did resolved the conflict in his mind. Nothing Liz said helped either. He was tired of her repeated assertions that she hadn't cheated on him, and that everything that had happened was too long ago to matter in their current lives. Why couldn't she see things from his point of view? Try to understand his feelings, instead of continuing to rely on the argument that the past should remain in the past. "So you're saying that if I killed someone a quarter of a century ago but have lived a good life since then, everything will be wiped off the face of the earth? Does it take 25 years, or can you clean up your life in less time? Does it depend on the severity of the crime?" Raleigh asked sharply. "Ah, Do you know what you are, you unbearable jerk? She shouted as she walked away. Raleigh expected to hear much worse when Liz handed him the divorce papers a couple of days later. He wasn't disappointed. You've got to be kidding! There's no way we're getting divorced! Come on, Raleigh! That was a long time ago, Liz shouted. That's the problem, Liz. You believe it's ancient history, but for me it's recent. I found out about your affair just a few weeks ago. The wound is still fresh, and that's part of the problem. The time difference. I'm not going to wait years for you to get over it. Get over it, Raleigh, she hissed. Liz's lawyer convinced the judge to agree to a dozen marriage counseling sessions. Even Raleigh had to admit that the sessions were justified. Deep down, he was looking for a reason not to divorce his wife. He knew he still loved her, even though her actions had shaken his faith in her to its core. Could he survive what he considered to be a grand display of disrespect that she had shown him over the years, and could he trust her in the future? He hadn't slept for weeks because he couldn't answer those questions. Over the past few weeks, Liz had repeatedly tried to calm her husband down by dragging him to bed. In the past, this strategy had always worked. The problem this time was that Raleigh wouldn't let his wife manipulate him. This decision was much more important than the color of the living room walls, the thickness of the sheets in the bedroom, or where they would go on their next vacation. They hadn't been close for a month, and it was one of the longest periods in their relationship. "You're killing me," she said to Raleigh when he turned her down again one evening. "It's just sex, not a lifelong commitment." And that's exactly why we disagree on this. Sex with you is a lifelong commitment for me. Whether we were just having fun or trying to start a family, sex with you has always been special to me. Until recently, I didn't realize you felt differently, Raleigh said. You're being very casual about the fact that you cheated on me before we got married. How do I know you won't do the same thing in the future? In the days after Liz received the papers, virtually all of the important members of the family came out in support of his wife, citing the time that had passed since Liz's questionable fling. Questionable? Raleigh asked when his son used that word. We were talking about marriage. We agreed to be faithful to each other. She was barely out of my sight and she slept with her ex-boyfriend. Without a condom. That's not questionable, that's unacceptable. And then, without telling me about it before the wedding, she cheated on me and lied by withholding important information. She knew we probably wouldn't have gotten married if I had found out that she slept with another guy several times while she was home that summer, not to mention that she got pregnant by him and had an abortion. Come on, Justin. That's not questionable. That's reckless. Raleigh's conversation with his mother-in-law was more contentious. You knew she was cheating on me. You knew about the abortion. But you didn't say a word to me. You abandoned me then in all these years. I believed you loved me, Raleigh said. Just one question. Did Jack know what his precious daughter had done? Helen sighed loudly into the phone. She really loved Raleigh and believed he was a great son-in-law, especially after her husband's death. She didn't approve of her daughter's decision to hide her affair and abortion from Raleigh, but Liz was family, and Raleigh wasn't at the time. Since the wedding, she had planned to tell him several times, but always backed down, remembering the old saying that blood is thicker than water. Bless his foolish heart, Helen began. He went to his grave believing that his daughter was a virgin until the day you married her. But yes, I knew Liz had done wrong. We didn't approve of it. Looking back, I realize I should have said something. But Raleigh, she was a good wife for 23 years. Doesn't that give her the right to make a mistake? Helen asked. That mistake is the only reason I didn't leave when I first found out, Raleigh replied indifferently. Even Raleigh's parents seemed to be on Liz's side, talking again about 23 years of happy marriage. But was it real? I was deceived by a master. The whole marriage was a sham. Our relationship should have ended the moment she cheated on me. What would you have done if your mother had done that to you, Dad? Raleigh's father didn't want to answer, but he knew now was not the time to remain silent. I probably would have hit her if your mother had done that to me, and I had found out earlier. There would have been no wedding, he said sadly. But you had a good marriage. Because I was deceived. That marriage shouldn't have happened, Raleigh growled. Listen, the kids are practically grown up. They're no longer a factor to consider. At least the divorce won't hurt them too much. The counselor fully understood Raleigh's thoughts about the time difference as one of the reasons why it was so difficult for him to get over Liz's betrayal. This is all new to him, Liz. You've had many years to get over this incident, began Counselor Ralph Siegel. Incident? What incident? Raleigh interrupted him. It wasn't an incident. It was outright cheating, and not just once. We were a couple, supposedly exclusive. We never discussed breaking up. Judging by the ultrasound, she must have been sleeping with him almost from the day she came home. It was a planned betrayal. The only thing I don't know is whether she planned it before we left for the summer. It wasn't planned, Liz interjected. I met my ex-boyfriend shortly after I came home and Raleigh and I weren't married, so... But we were committed to each other. We talked about it, Raleigh said. Yes, I suppose so, Liz replied, her voice tinged with guilt. But I gave you 23 years and 2 wonderful children. You must know how much I love you, Raleigh said. I believe that, Liz. I believe how much you love me, Raleigh said quietly. I know you as well as you know me. That means I know you asked your ex-boyfriend to marry you so you could raise the child together. The fact that you had an abortion tells me what his answer was. But what if he had agreed to marry you and raise the child? You would have agreed, wouldn't you? Liz shifted in her chair as Raleigh and the counselor looked at her. The seconds seemed to drag on forever. Yes, because then I could have kept the baby, she whispered, barely audible. That's only partly true, baby, Raleigh said. You would have married him anyway, even if he didn't want a child. Isn't that right? There was no answer for more than 10 seconds. Finally, she nodded silently. I understand, Raleigh said. He was your first love, your true love. I was your backup, your consolation prize. Maybe you loved me. A little, but he was your first love. I became your plan B, and you loved me enough to give me and our family a wonderful life. But imagine how much better things could have been if I had been your first choice. No one wants to be someone's consolation prize. Liz's face turned pale. She opened and closed her mouth several times but couldn't say a word. I've lived my whole life in a lie because after you cheated on me and lied to me. If you hadn't done that, I would have been free and could have found a woman who chose me as her first choice, not a consolation prize. You took that opportunity away from me with your selfish decisions. But at least you gave me 2 wonderful children. I have to thank you for that. But we've been together for almost 25 years. I was a good wife and mother. You said so yourself, Liz whined. You were always in love with that guy. I bet you still love him, Raleigh said, staring intently at his wife. If he showed up right now, your heart would probably start beating faster. You didn't care about the abortion. You wanted him, but he didn't want you. He wanted another woman. You loved him, but he only saw you as a woman who was available. For him, sex with you was really just sex, as it says in the guidebook for cheaters. Tears streamed from Liz's eyes. Raleigh looked exhausted. The counselor also seemed to need a break. I believe I've said everything I need to say, Raleigh whispered before getting up from his chair and leaving the room. Even the judge presiding over the case was puzzled by Raleigh's insistence on divorce. He called Raleigh into the courtroom to talk to him again before signing the divorce papers. I am puzzled and saddened by your insistence on divorce, Mr. Meminger. Even you yourself admit that you had a wonderful marriage, despite how it ended. Do you know how many people would kill for what you have? There was no guarantee that your marriage would have been better if you had married a man who didn't cheat on you when you were dating. I can't believe you're voluntarily giving up such a wonderful marriage, said the judge. I don't believe I'm voluntarily giving up a wonderful marriage, Your Honor, replied Raleigh. I was tricked into getting married. Without that deception, there probably wouldn't have been a marriage. The judge looked at Liz, who just blushed and lowered her head. He pressed his lips together and exhaled before signing the divorce papers. Liz cried when the judge announced his decision. It was 25 years ago, she sobbed. I can't believe you did that. Yeah, well, I can't believe you cheated on me multiple times, apparently without any remorse, so I guess we're even, Raleigh replied, gathering his things and leaving the courtroom. Raleigh continued individual counseling because he knew he had serious anger issues, not only because of his ex-wife, but also because his entire family blamed him for the divorce. His parents and children said they understood his feelings, but continued to harass him about his decision, mostly referring to how long ago the affair had taken place. His argument was always that there was no statute of limitations on Liz's infidelity and deception. During the first 18 months after the divorce, Raleigh never went on a date. Finally, he met a woman when he literally bumped into her at the grocery store. He bumped into her with his shopping cart, which rolled away from him while he was reading the label on a frozen pizza. He started apologizing to the tall, thin Asian woman who looked about his age, but realized she was smiling broadly at him. He stopped apologizing and raised his hands in surrender. What did I miss? He asked, looking guilty. Don't tell me my fly is open or something? You're new to this, aren't you? She asked. Raleigh was puzzled. How could this woman know he was divorced? She noticed his gaze. No one reads the labels on frozen pizza boxes, except newbies, and you still have a mark on your ring finger. Gotcha, she said, still smiling. He sighed and smiled back. He glanced at the ring finger of her left hand and saw that it was empty. When he looked up, she was looking into his eyes. I'm Mai Nordgren, divorced for 8 years, married for 10. And you? She asked, holding out her hand. Roland Meminger. Raleigh, he replied, shaking her hand. I got divorced about 18 months after 24 years of marriage, when the divorce was finalized. They chatted for a couple of minutes. Then Raleigh asked the woman for her phone number. He also arranged to meet her the following Friday evening. During their date at a Hungarian restaurant, Raleigh asked Mai about her Asian features and Scandinavian surname, noting that it was an unusual combination. Mai giggled softly and admitted that Raleigh was right. My mom is a 5'0" Chinese American, and my dad is a 6'4" Norwegian American. There are only 6 Norwegian Chinese people living in the U.S., and my sister and I are 2 of them, she explained. That makes me practically a unicorn. I guess that means we're perfect for each other. I'm called a unicorn because I divorced my wife after 24 years of happy marriage. Well, to be precise, I'm called an idiot because I divorced my wife after 24 years of happy marriage, not counting the lies and deceit that led to the marriage, he said. The unicorn couple got married about a year later. The wedding was attended by both of Raleigh's children and his parents, as well as May's parents, her sister, and her family. Liz had not dated anyone since Raleigh's second marriage, hoping until the very end that her ex-husband would change his mind and take her back. Her children and mother tried to convince her to forget the past. However, Liz could not do so for many reasons. They didn't know that before deciding to wait for Raleigh, she had first checked Scott Wilkins's marital status. However, Wilkins was still married to the woman he had chosen over Liz a quarter of a century ago. She would never admit to Raleigh that he was right. He was still a comfort to her.